It took me 3 weeks to plan my 65th birthday dinner, 3 weeks of carefully selecting every detail. I pored over recipes with handwritten notes from my mother called half a dozen florists to get the exact shade of hydrangeas I remembered from Daniel's childhood birthdays. I even bought a new navy blue dress, simple A-line with pearl buttons down the front, the kind that made me feel like someone worth dressing up for, the kind Daniel once said made me look elegant, like a woman who knows her worth. The menu was everything I loved and everything I knew they loved. Roast pork shoulder with rosemary and garlic scallop potatoes, green beans with caramelized onions, fresh cornbread, and the chocolate cake I'd made for every family birthday since Daniel turned 10. I baked it that morning, humming as I frosted it, imagining Noah's sweet face lighting up at the first bite. I set the table for 8. Not just 8 plates, but 8 identities, 8 histories. Daniel, my only child, and Vanessa, his wife. Noah, 7 years old and curious about everything. Lily, 5, delicate as a petal and always drawing pictures for me. My sister Susan and her husband Ron. I even wrote out place cards in my best cursive, as if that would somehow make the gathering more real, more grounded, more mine. I lit candles at 5:45, poured myself a small glass of wine at 6. I glanced out the window every few minutes, the evening light slipping away like a secret. At 6:30, I checked my phone again. Nothing. Still, I waited. Because that's what mothers do. We wait even when we shouldn't. By 7:00, my fingers hovered over my phone. I called Daniel first. Voicemail. Vanessa straight to voicemail too. Then Susan. My sister who always answered by the second ring. No answer. Maybe there was a family emergency, a flat tire, something urgent. But there'd have been a message, wouldn't there? At 7:30, I stood in the doorway of the dining room and stared at the table as if it might explain itself to me. The roast had gone dry in the oven, the green beans wilted. The scalloped potatoes had formed a crust that wasn't there an hour ago. At 8:00, I accepted it, they weren't coming. The silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like rejection. A full, hollow vacuum pressing on my chest, reminding me I had orchestrated something beautiful that nobody asked for. I didn't cry. Instead, I began cleaning, as if reversing time might bring them back. The clink of the good china going back into the cabinet echoed in the quiet like accusations. Each plate, once laid out with hope, now felt like a mark of my foolishness. I moved mechanically, blew out the candles, wrapped the cake, dumped the untouched salad into the compost bin. And then, stupidly, I opened Facebook. The first image made my body go still. Vanessa in a flowing white sundress, standing beside Daniel, both of them glowing with the kind of happiness you don't fake. Behind them, a stunning view of the Mediterranean. The caption read, "Living our best life on the Mediterranean. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." My thumb hovered over the screen. There were more. Noah and Lily building sandcastles on a beach that looked like it belonged in a travel magazine. Susan and Ron clinking glasses at a cruise bar, laughing under string lights. Plates of food children with gelato sunsets behind yacht railings. Every person I had invited was on that ship. Together. Celebrating something. Celebrating themselves. And not a single one of them had thought to tell me. The timestamp on the post, 1 hour earlier. While I was sitting alone at my dining room table imagining them stuck in traffic or busy with last-minute errands, they were thousands of miles away toasting each other with champagne, probably even saying cheers to family. I put the phone down gently. That small glowing rectangle suddenly felt radioactive. A message buzzed in from Daniel. "Sorry, Mom, forgot to mention we're out of town this week. Vanessa booked a surprise trip. Happy birthday, though. Forgot to mention. A cruise. On my birthday. With the whole family." I walked to the kitchen, turned off the oven, and leaned against the counter, letting the heat soak into my spine. My hands shook. Not from age, not from arthritis, but from something else. Something deeper and colder. Not anger, not grief. Not yet. Just the slow, creeping realization that I'd been intentionally left behind. This wasn't the first time I'd been forgotten. Last Christmas, Vanessa had called 2 days before and said Daniel needed a break, just the four of them this year. I'd spent the holiday with leftover ham and a black and white movie marathon. And then Susan accidentally let it slip in February that she'd seen photos from the Christmas party. A big one. 20 people. Friends, neighbors. Everyone but me. I should have seen the pattern. The way Vanessa always offered a sweet smile and a ready excuse. "Oh, we meant to call. Sorry it was last minute. You know how chaotic the kids are." But this wasn't chaos. This was something planned, methodical, cruel. I stared into the darkened dining room. The place cards were still there. My name in calligraphy at the head of the table. I caught my reflection in the window. I looked. Small. Smaller than I remembered. Like a woman watching her family move on without her. Like a woman becoming invisible one skipped dinner at a time. It wasn't always like this. There was a time Daniel called me every Sunday, a time I'd hear the doorbell ring and find Noah holding a scribbled drawing proudly announcing, "For Grandma." A time I believed I was part of something warm and real and unshakable. But somewhere between PTA meetings and business promotions, I faded into the margins of my own family. I remember the first time Vanessa corrected Noah in front of me. He had called me Grandma Helen at Thanksgiving, and she leaned down, smoothed his hair, and said, "It's just Grandma Sweetie. Let's not confuse names." I brushed it off at the time, but the way she said it like I was a title, not a person, stuck with me. Over the years, there were signs, subtle ones. My casserole never made it to the buffet table during family potlucks. My stories about Daniel's childhood were gently interrupted. Photos I wasn't in made it to the holiday cards. But I told myself, families evolve. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the kind who clings or complains. So I made myself useful instead. I watched the kids when they had work trips. I sent care packages. I organized birthday parties, decorated cakes, arranged balloons, and paid for jumpy castles without ever asking for credit. I kept my love quiet, folded into acts of service. That's how I was raised. My mother, Margaret, used to say, "Love isn't loud. It's in the details, the warm bread, the mended sock." And maybe that's what doomed me, because Vanessa wasn't raised like that. She understood power, optics, positioning, and slowly, over years of smiles and softened tones, she edged me out of Daniel's life with surgical precision. She framed me as fragile, as forgetful, as too much and too little all at once. At first I tried harder. I complimented her parenting, bought her spa gift cards for Mother's Day, took her side during minor disagreements just to keep the peace. But peace was never the goal. I wasn't meant to blend in, I was meant to disappear. There was the birthday party where I arrived and realized the theme was already set and I hadn't been told. I stood there in blue when everyone else wore yellow. Vanessa laughed. "Oh no, did no one tell you? That's okay. You still look nice." Or the time they asked me to babysit for the weekend, said they were going to a couple's retreat. But later, I saw photos of them at a vineyard with Susan and Ron. Matching outfits, group toasts. When I gently asked Daniel why I wasn't invited, he said, "We didn't think you'd want to go. It's more of a couple's thing." I nodded. I always nodded, because if I didn't, I'd be painted as bitter. And I didn't want that. Until now. Now I saw the pattern. The revisionist history slowly unfolding one exclusion at a time. That birthday dinner I spent weeks preparing, it wasn't forgotten. It was overwritten. Because somewhere between my intentions and their itinerary, Vanessa made a decision I no longer fit the image. The realization hit like cold water, awakening and brutal. But I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out an envelope, one I hadn't touched in years. It was from my late husband, Walter. He'd written it 2 months before he passed. I'd never fully read it, grief made it too hard at the time. But that night, with cake untouched in the fridge and silence ringing in my ears, I unfolded the pages. His handwriting was shaky but familiar, comforting, and his words pierced through the fog in my heart. "Helen, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to shield you. But you were always the strong one. the steady one. Don't let them make you small. You built this family, you love them into existence, and one day they'll try to rewrite that story. Don't let them. I sat back in my chair staring at those final words. Don't let them. That was when something shifted. Not in anger, not yet, but in clarity. They had their trip, their curated joy, their clean slate. But I had something they didn't. I had history, documentation, and I had Walter's name still attached to something they'd all forgotten, a trust. Walter had created it years ago, tied to a property none of them remembered, an old cottage on the lake bought when Daniel was 10. It had sat unused, considered too remote for vacations, but it was in my name now, fully, and not just the cottage. Walter had once been the quiet steward of our town's credit union board. I remembered a conversation from years ago, a trust fund separate from the estate. Quiet, protective, just in case he had said. That night, I dug through the filing cabinet in the guest room and found the documents. And what I saw there didn't just confirm my suspicions, it sparked something dangerous. Power. Not to hurt, but to decide. To rewrite the ending myself. They had left me behind, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I didn't say a word to them for 3 weeks. Not out of spite. Out of study. I watched their social media like a surgeon studies scans before an operation. I noted who liked what, who commented. I took screenshots not to accuse, but to remember. Susan, always the eager mouthpiece, had posted a caption under a group photo. Family is everything. The irony nearly choked me. Family is everything, as long as I wasn't in the frame. Daniel texted once more. Mom, are you okay? Haven't heard from you. I didn't answer, because I wasn't ready to speak until I knew exactly what I wanted to say. Instead, I turned inward into silence, into memory, into paperwork. I went through Walter's old files like I was looking for oxygen in a burning house. Trust accounts, land deeds, his brown leather journal that still smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon oil. And what emerged wasn't just a protective measure. It was a shield, and in Walter's usual quiet brilliance, a warning. He had placed the lake cottage, yes, the one we bought when Daniel was 10, the one they called too old, too ugly into a trust. A real one. Not just paperwork, but power. I was the sole trustee. The cottage and the investment portfolio, tied to it, legally mine, to maintain or redirect. Daniel was only listed as a contingent beneficiary, but what stopped my breath wasn't the property. It was a clause scrawled in Walter's thin, uneven handwriting. In the event of demonstrated familial abandonment of the primary trustee, all future rights shall be transferred to local community stewardship. I read it twice, then a third time. He had known. Maybe not the details, but he had seen something coming, some seed of neglect, some whisper of erasure, and left me a doorway. Not for revenge, for dignity. If they discarded me, I could choose to discard the legacy, not out of malice, but as an act of clarity. I could donate it all to a local women's housing initiative Walter once funded in secret, or I could retitle everything and rebuild on my own terms. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the planks like prayers, and I made a decision. I wouldn't disappear. I began walking the 1.5 miles to the cottage each morning, through dew-covered grass past the mossy stone wall Walter once repaired after a storm. The path hadn't been touched in years, but my feet remembered it. The house itself was tired, leaning slightly to one side, but it was still there, like me. I called Maya, a young carpenter whose mother used to clean our home every Friday for 20 years. Maya didn't ask questions, just nodded when I handed her Walter's old sketches for the porch renovation. Every day we worked in silence. I painted the windowsills white again, scrubbed layers of dust from the pinewood floors, pulled up weeds from the path, replaced the doorknob Walter once called stubborn as a mule. I didn't speak to Daniel, I didn't speak to Susan, but I did speak to Elise, my lawyer, sharp as broken glass in moonlight. When she reviewed the trust, she looked up at me and said, "They have no idea this exists, do they?" "No," I said. "And I'd like to keep it that way." We filed the documents that week, sealed the clause, added an addendum: if I passed, the property would automatically go to the local women's initiative unless I said otherwise. That trust was no longer a backup plan. It was a boundary. And maybe, for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an invitation to matter. I was building my own place of belonging plank by plank. One afternoon, as I was repainting the front door, a soft sage green, the same color I used when Daniel was born, an SUV pulled up. Daniel. Alone. I didn't flinch, didn't wave, just kept painting. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket like he was walking into a meeting he didn't prepare for. "Mom, you've been here?" I dipped the brush again. "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked up, met his eyes. I needed quiet. He nodded slowly. "Vanessa thinks you're mad." I said nothing. He stepped closer. "Look about the cruise it was last minute. We didn't plan to exclude you. Didn't you?" I said. He blinked. "We thought you wouldn't enjoy it. You get seasick, remember I would have liked the choice." He shifted, uncomfortable. It was meant to be simple. And yet I said, "Here we are." He looked around, taking in the fresh paint, the garden beds I'd replanted. "You've been fixing this up?" "Yes." Why, I stared at him, at the man I raised, at the boy who once ran barefoot down this very hallway with a toy airplane in hand, because I needed something to come home to, even if it wasn't you. He opened his mouth, closed it. I handed him the paintbrush. He didn't take it. Instead, he said, "Vanessa said you might be planning something, legally." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Eventually, he left, and I went back to painting, each stroke a boundary, each nail a reminder. They had made their choices. Now I was making mine. By the time autumn curled its fingers around the edges of the lake, the cottage looked almost alive again. I'd strung soft golden lights across the porch Walter built with his bare hands. They flickered gently at dusk, like little sentinels keeping watch. The windows no longer sighed with dust, and forgotten things, they glowed. Maya and I had become quiet companions. We installed new gutters, hauled timber for the stairs, and planted mums in deep orange and red along the gravel path. I watched as the porch railing went from splintered gray to a proud, rich walnut stain. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming part of myself. I kept receipts, took photos, logged hours, filed everything neatly under a folder labeled Legacy, not because I wanted to prove anything to them, but because I knew one day they'd come asking. They always did, just never to listen, only to claim. So I stayed quiet, didn't post online, didn't return calls. When Susan emailed me asking for a scan of Walter's will for tax stuff, I replied with precision, "All documents have been reviewed by counsel. No action is required at this time." 3 days later, Daniel sent an email. Short, sterile, corporate. "We'd like to propose a family meeting. We think there have been some misunderstandings." I didn't reply. Instead, I called Elise. "I want to make a move," I said. Her voice didn't flinch. "Tell me everything." We talked for over 2 hours. I paced the living room, barefoot phone tucked between my shoulder and cheek, flipping through Walter's journal and rereading his old letters to Daniel. Letters that now felt strangely hollow in the face of reality. "I don't want them near this place," I said. "Not physically, not financially, not spiritually." Elise, ever precise, asked, "You're ready to transfer the trust, I'm ready to transform it." We rewrote the purpose clause. I transferred ownership of the cottage from the trust to a community nonprofit I'd helped Walter fund years ago, the Carter Grove Foundation. It had once been a tax shelter. Now it would be something real. Maya's name went on the renovation contract as historic preservation lead. I offered her the role of site director. She blinked back, tears nodded once, and got to work writing program outlines. The cottage would become a retreat for women over 50 seeking to re-enter the workforce, offering housing reskilling workshops, resume clinics, and peace, a second chance. Just like I once needed but never got. Elise filed the deed transfer and sealed the trust behind a new set of conditions. My name remained on the board, but the power was no longer theirs to inherit. It was done. Not out of revenge, out of restoration, out of clarity, out of survival. The day after filing, I sat on the steps of the porch, sipping spiced tea from Walter's old metal mug. The trees were fire-colored, burning quietly in the wind. A blue jay hopped along the railing like it owned the place. And maybe that's what I was now, too, something wild, unbothered, back where I belonged. Susan's voicemails turned syrupy. "Hi, Mom. Just wondering if you're still staying at the lake house. Maybe we could come visit next weekend. Vanessa says the leaves are beautiful this time of year." The next day, Daniel emailed again. This one was longer, padded with concern, like stuffing in an old couch cushion. "We hope you're doing okay. Vanessa and I are thinking of starting a nonprofit. Maybe you could help us structure it. You've always been so good with that kind of thing. They didn't miss me. They missed access." I powered down the computer, tucked it away in the drawer under Walter's book of bird calls, and lit a fire instead. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. A woman stood there, early 60s, salt-streaked curls, eyes the color of riverstone. She held a weathered envelope with my name written in Walter's hand. "I was told to give this to you directly," she said. "He left it with our clinic last year. Said it was for when the season turns." I took the envelope with both hands. The paper was thick rough, like old bark. Inside was a short note dated almost a year before his stroke. "Helen, if they ever forget who you are, remind them without words. This place is yours until you choose otherwise. I loved you more than I said. W." My hands trembled. The scent of the letter cedar ink and old tobacco brought me to my knees. I sat on the porch envelope in my lap and let the tears come for the first time since that cursed cruise. Not from pain, not from loneliness, from clarity, from knowing that this was power. The kind that didn't need microphones or applause, the kind that came from being rooted so deeply no storm could shake you. I was no longer a footnote in their family tree. I was the soil beneath it. Susan and Daniel didn't stop. When silence didn't work, they tried nostalgia. Voicemails began arriving daily, forced laughter stuffed inside old memories like spoiled meat in gift wrap. "Remember when we used to make apple cider together? You'd hum Patsy Cline by the stove." Then came the guilt. "I don't know what we did wrong," Susan said in one message, her voice wobbling like a child. "We're your children. Why are you being so cruel?" Daniel followed 2 hours later. "It's not healthy to hold grudges. You're isolating yourself. Let's be mature adults." They weren't reaching out to reconnect. They were probing for weakness. I didn't flinch. Instead, I quietly filed an update to my living will, removing both of them from all medical and financial access. I switched my emergency contact to Maya. I even changed the access codes to the cabin and rekeyed every lock. Not out of revenge, out of clarity. I was tired of being a woman who left doors open just in case her children decided to love her again. That version of me was gone. Then came the final push. Daniel left a voicemail, tight-clipped performative. "If you don't respond, we'll be forced to pursue legal clarification regarding the trust. I'd hate for this to get messy." The next day, Elise called me. She'd received a copy of the filing. They're contesting the trust, she said, alleging coercion, elder abuse, and that you acted against Walter's wishes. I laughed. Not a cruel laugh. A hollow one. I had given up everything for that man, my credit, my peace, my time, and now I was being painted as a gold-digging puppet master. But Elise was ready. We had timelines, emails, medical records. 2 notarized letters Walter had written the year before his stroke. One said, "Helen restored my faith in everything. If anyone ever questions her right to choose, remind them she was the only one who stayed." The court hearing was held in a beige conference room with stale coffee and a flickering fluorescent light that gave everyone headaches. Daniel sat on one side, flanked by a smug junior lawyer who kept using phrases like exploited proximity and undue influence. I wore navy, my hands folded, Elise beside me like a blade in a sheath. They tried everything. Said I'd manipulated Walter during his vulnerable final days, that I had isolated him from beloved grandchildren, that I'd twisted his nonprofit into some rebranding project to glorify myself. But when Elise played the audio recording, Walter's voice clear and resolute saying, "If anyone tries to gut what Helen built, they'll be stealing from me. This is our shared legacy." Every lie collapsed under its own weight. The judge ruled swiftly. Motion denied no merit, all costs to be paid by the plaintiffs. Daniel wouldn't look at me. Susan left the room before the verdict was read. I walked out into the sunlight and let it sit on my shoulders like a coat of armor. For weeks it went quiet. No calls, no messages. Then came the invitation, engraved cream cardstock gold foil lettering. You are cordially invited to a celebration of Walter Carter's legacy, hosted by his children Daniel and Susan, at Lakeshore Country Club. Formal attire. Kindly RSVP. I stared at the RSVP line where someone had written in black ink, "We'd be honored if you'd speak." I almost choked on the irony. After cutting me out of the obituary, after erasing me from the cruise, after dragging my name through court, now they wanted my presence to make it look wholesome, to polish the tarnish, to borrow my grief for their PR. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That same week, the Carter Grove Foundation was featured in a national nonprofit documentary series called Second Acts. Maya had given an interview from the newly finished porch wearing a soft burgundy sweater Walter once wore every Thanksgiving. Her words were calm, intentional. "This isn't just a house," she said. "It's proof that love can take root in broken ground. My mother saved this space, and now it saves others." They showed footage of the garden, the bunk rooms, the job training center, and the old boathouse. At the end, a photo faded in Walter and I, standing on the porch, hands clasped, faces wrinkled by laughter. The credits rolled. I was listed as co-founder. The documentary aired the same weekend as the country club event. I didn't go. But I heard what happened. One of Walter's old college friends, Mr. Tenley, called me the next day. "They played your documentary, Helen, right there in the middle of Susan's speech. Someone pulled it up on their iPad and mirrored it to the projector." The room went still. He chuckled. Susan looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. Daniel tried to talk over it, but nobody listened. I thanked him, hung up, and sat by the fireplace. No gloating, no champagne, just peace. Let them throw parties. Let them print brochures and beg for GoFundMe donations they never planned to distribute. I had already built something real, and I didn't need a microphone, just a foundation, a purpose, and the truth. The lake wind howled that night, brushing against the window panes like a whisper from Walter. I whispered back, "They saw it, just like you said they would." I never heard from Susan or Daniel again, not directly at least, but I knew they saw it. The foundation kept growing. Donations began to pour in after the documentary aired small checks from women in nursing homes, Venmo transfers, labeled "For Walter" envelopes with handwritten letters from daughters and widows and strangers who'd lived in silence too long. I hired 3 new staff members. One of the women we helped, a retired teacher whose husband died, suddenly started leading grief workshops. The house felt alive in a way it never had before, not haunted, not heavy, but full. Full of people who'd been erased and were writing themselves back into existence. The old porch where Walter used to sip black coffee at 5 a.m. now echoed with planning meetings, tea circles, and bursts of laughter. Maya painted a mural on the cabin's side wall, sunflowers pushing through cracked stone, her way of saying, "Broken things still bloom." Then one Tuesday, Maya handed me an envelope. No return address. Inside, just a small folded card in Daniel's handwriting. "I don't understand you. I probably never will. But if this is really what Walter wanted, then I guess you got it right. No apology. No warmth. Just one jagged sentence. Somewhere between resentment and resignation. I read it twice, then tucked it back into the envelope. I didn't write back. Instead, I slipped it behind the original trust documents in the filing cabinet, buried behind lines of legal language and Walter's careful signature. Quiet proof. That's all I needed. Not a public victory. Not revenge. Just one final punctuation mark. I survived. A few weeks later, an email came. Subject line, Keynote Inquiry Seattle Women's Leadership Summit. They'd seen the documentary. They wanted me to speak about legacy healing, nonprofit leadership, and love. I stared at the screen. My chest tightened. I hadn't stood in front of an audience in decades. Not since my nursing days when I gave an in-service on end-of-life care in a cafeteria with a flickering bulb and no microphone. But Elise nudged me. "You already told your story," she said. "The room's just a little bigger this time." So I went. I wore the navy pantsuit Walter once called my battle armor. Maya slipped a small carved owl into my palm before I boarded the plane. "He's with you," she whispered. The auditorium was glowing. Hundreds of seats, bright lights, people shuffling in with notebooks and tissues and weary hope. And when I stood behind the lectern, something settled inside me. Not confidence exactly, but clarity. I told them the real story, not the one Daniel told his boardroom, not the one Susan muttered to family friends, the true one, about a woman who gave everything to a family that saw her as an accessory until one man saw her as a partner. And when he died, he left her a gift more valuable than diamonds or deeds. He left her belief, and she built a legacy with it. When I finished, the room went still, that kind of still where even the air seems to pause. Then came one clap, then two, and then a rising ocean of hands and voices standing not for performance, but for something they recognized in themselves. Afterward, a woman with silver braids approached me in tears. "You're the reason I'm rewriting my will tonight," she said. "My nephew calls once a year for money, but my goddaughter visits weekly and fills my fridge. I'm done pretending blood is loyalty." She hugged me, and I felt it. Not pity, not praise, but kinship. I met dozens more. A librarian stocking our pamphlets, a therapist requesting our materials for her grief group, a teenage girl who said I thought I was crazy, until now. When I returned, the cabin smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Maya had lit a fire in the hearth. We drank chamomile tea and sat in the golden hush of dusk shadows flickering on the walls. Walter's photo was on the mantel, him in that old hiking vest, eyes crinkled, half smiling like he always knew. "He always believed in you," Maya whispered. "I know," I said. And for a long time, that had to be enough. But now I looked at her eyes steady, the room warm, the fire crackling. Now I believe in me. We didn't toast. We didn't cry. We just sat there. In the stillness of a life reclaimed, knowing something had ended and something better had begun. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you? Tell me your story in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone.